The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was enormous. It was built inside a hollow mountain on the neutral world of Orith, and its curved walls stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the ceiling. 42 species held seats in this room, 42 voices that decided the fate of the galaxy, and at the very back, on the smallest and lowest chair, sat the representative of Earth. His name was Dowan. He was 31 years old, and he had been Earth's ambassador to the Council for only 8 months. He sat straight in his small chair and watched the giant screen at the center of the chamber, as Grand Arbiter Veloth rose to speak. Veloth was old. Nobody knew exactly how old, but the other species whispered that he had held his seat for over 300 years. He had 6 long limbs and a face like cracked stone, and when he spoke, the entire chamber went silent. Fellow members of the Galactic Council, Veloth began, his voice deep and slow. I bring before you today a matter of security, a matter of survival. I speak of the humans. Dohan felt his stomach drop. 60 years ago, we welcomed humanity into this council. We gave them a seat. We gave them trade routes. We gave them a chance to exist among civilized species. Veloth paused and looked around the room. And what have they done with this gift? They have expanded faster than any species in recorded history. They breed without limit. They build without permission. And most troubling of all, they refuse to share their military research with this council for proper regulation. Dohan pressed the button on his chair to request permission to speak. A small red light blinked on his panel. It meant his request was denied. He pressed it again. Denied again. Veloth continued, as if Dohan did not exist. Humanity is unpredictable. Their technology evolves in ways our scientists cannot model. They do not follow the natural order of development. They skip steps. They invent things that should take 1,000 years in mere decades. This is not normal. This is dangerous. Murmurs filled the chamber. Dohan could see the representatives of other species nodding. Some of them were species that had traded with Earth for years. Some of them had shared meals with human diplomats. Now, they nodded along like none of that mattered. Because it never did, Dohan realized. They never saw us as equals. Not once. He thought about the Orith humiliation. It happened before he was born. But every human knew the story. 30 years ago, Earth's delegation had come to this very chamber to negotiate mining rights in 3 star systems. The Council had made them wait for 6 hours. Then, they had laughed at Earth's proposal in open session. Then, they had forced Earth to sign away all 3 systems, for nothing. The lead diplomat had returned to Earth and resigned the next morning. That diplomat's daughter was now the most powerful admiral in the United Earth Navy. I call for a vote, Veloth said. Resolution 7742. Authorization for the combined Council fleet to enter human space and disarm humanity by force. This is not punishment. This is prevention. Dohan slammed his hand on the speaking button. This time, his microphone activated for half a second before someone cut it. The human representative is out of order, Veloth said calmly. I have the right to speak before any vote that concerns my species, Dohan shouted, but his voice came out thin and small in the vast chamber without amplification. A few representatives glanced at him. Most did not bother. The vote was called. One by one the species cast their decisions. The screen at the center of the chamber filled with colors. Blue for yes, red for no, gray for abstain. Blue, 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 blue. 38 species voted yes. 3 abstained. Only 1 voted no. Emissary Palak, a tall and thin being with silver skin and large dark eyes, stood after casting his red vote. I urge this council to reconsider, he said. His voice was quiet but steady. You do not understand what you are provoking. I have studied the humans longer than most of you have been aware they exist. This will not end the way you believe." Veloff dismissed him with a wave of one limb. "Your objection is noted, emissary. The resolution passes. The war begins." The chamber erupted in formal applause. Dohan sat frozen in his small chair at the back of the room, staring at the screen full of blue. 12,000 light-years away, at Waystation 12 on the edge of human space, Lieutenant Jisok stood on the bridge of the warship Haite and watched the broadcast on the main screen. The Council's declaration played on every channel, in every language, across the entire galaxy. The bridge crew was silent. Some of them had gone pale. A young ensign near the navigation console was gripping the edge of her station so hard her knuckles were white. "They actually did it," someone whispered. Captain Tejo stood behind the command chair with his arms crossed. He was not watching the screen. He was watching the woman sitting in the command chair. Admiral Yuna had her back to the screen. She was reading something on her personal tablet, as if the most important broadcast in human history was just background noise. Her hair was pulled back in a tight knot. Her uniform was perfect. She had not moved in 10 minutes. Jisek stared at her. He had served under Admiral Yuna for only 3 weeks, and in that time he had learned one thing about her. She never reacted to anything. Not to bad news, not to good news, not to anything at all. The broadcast ended. The bridge fell into total silence. Then Yuna set down her tablet. She turned her chair around slowly and faced the main screen. The Council seal was still displayed, along with the words of Resolution 7742. And she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very, very long time for exactly this moment. "Captain Tejo," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "Admiral, open a channel to every ship in the fleet." Tejo hesitated for just a moment, then nodded to the communications officer. "Channel open, Admiral. Fleet-wide." Yuna stood. She straightened her uniform. She looked directly into the camera above the main screen, and she spoke 2 words that would be remembered for the rest of human history. "At last." Then she turned to Tejo. "Wake the sleepers. Activate Protocol Guangato." The color drained from Tejo's face. Jisok did not know what those words meant, but he watched his captain, a man he had never seen afraid of anything, go completely white. "Admiral," Tejo said slowly, "are you certain?" Yuna looked at him with those cold, patient eyes. "I have been certain for 30 years, Captain. Now carry out my order." Tejo swallowed. Then he straightened his back and said, "Yes, Admiral." He began issuing commands, and across human space, in places no one in the galaxy knew existed, things began to wake up. Chancellor Soha appeared on every screen on Earth at exactly 9 in the morning. She stood behind a simple wooden desk, with no flags, no symbols, and no military officers beside her. She wore a dark gray suit, and her face was calm. The people of Earth expected panic. They expected fear. They got neither. "Citizens of Earth and all human territories," she began. 6 hours ago, the Galactic Council voted to declare war on humanity. 38 species decided, without our input and without our consent, that we are too dangerous to exist as we are. They intend to enter our space, disarm our military, and place us under permanent supervision. She paused and let the words settle. "We spent 60 years asking for peace. We spent 60 years sitting in the lowest chair in their chamber, following their rules, accepting their insults, and hoping they would learn to see us as equals. They did not. They never intended to." Her eyes did not waver. "So be it. Admiral Yuna has full operational command of the United Earth Navy as of this morning. I have only one message for the Council." She leaned forward slightly. "You should have listened to Emissary Palak." The broadcast ended. Across human space, there was no panic. There were no riots in the streets. People went quiet. They looked at each other with something that was not fear. It was something harder and older than fear. It was the look of people who had always known this day was coming. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in tunnels that did not exist on any public record, lights turned on for the first time in decades. Massive doors, each one 50 meters tall, began to slide open. Behind those doors sat warships, 2,000 of them. They were black and angular, built from materials the Council had never seen, powered by engines the Council could not understand, and armed with weapons the Council did not believe were possible. Each ship had a name, painted on its hull in white letters. The names were taken from moments in human history when someone had been underestimated and had proven the world wrong. This was the Gwanggaeto fleet, and it had been waiting for 30 years. On the bridge of the Haete, Taeho stood at the observation window and watched as the first wave of Gwanggaeto ships emerged from the dark side of the moon and slipped into formation around the existing fleet. He had known about Protocol Gwanggaeto for years. He was one of only 12 people in the military who did. But knowing about it and seeing it were two very different things. "She really built it," he whispered. He thought about the day he first met Yuna. It was 20 years ago. He was a young officer, and she was already a rear admiral with a reputation for being impossible to read. She had called him into her office and shown him a single document on a tablet. It was the outline for Protocol Gwanggaeto, and it described a war that had not started yet, against an enemy that did not know it was an enemy. "Why are you showing me this?" he had asked. "Because I need someone who will not lose their nerve when the time comes," she had replied. "Will that be you, Captain?" He had said yes. He had spent 20 years wondering if she was mad. Now he stood on the bridge of the most powerful warship humanity had ever built and realized she was not mad. She was patient. Yuna herself was in the war room below the bridge, standing before a massive holographic map of the galaxy. Beside her was Mireille, the head of Earth's intelligence division. Mireille was a small woman with short hair and a face that always looked like she was slightly amused by something no one else could see. She had spent the last 40 years building the most extensive spy network in galactic history, and she had done it so quietly that not a single Council species had ever suspected. "How deep are we?" Yuna asked. Mireille pulled up a display. Thousands of tiny dots appeared across Council space, each one representing an embedded operative, a compromised system, or a planted device. "We have full access to their military communication network," Mireille said. "Every order they send, we will see before their own officers do. We have operatives on 14 Council homeworlds. We have taps on their sensor grid across 3 galactic arms. And I planted a nice little surprise in their shipyard at Neth 4 about 6 years ago that they still haven't found." Yuna studied the map. "Commander Dreth is assembling their fleet." "How many ships?" "Current count is 10,000, with more coming. 38 species contributing." "And their assessment of our strength?" Mireille smiled. "They believe we have approximately 600 combat-capable ships. They think this will be over in a week." Yuna said nothing for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Good. Let them think that." On the lower decks of the Haete, Jisok walked through the corridors and felt a change he could not quite name. The ship was the same. The walls were the same gray metal. The lights were the same cold white. But the people were different. He passed 2 engineers who were working on a power relay, and they were smiling. Not nervous smiles, real ones. He passed a group of Marines loading weapons in the armory, and they were joking with each other like they were preparing for a training exercise, not a war against the entire galaxy. He stopped an older sergeant named Bora. "Doesn't anyone here feel afraid?" he asked. Bora looked at him for a moment, then laughed softly. Lieutenant, I joined the Navy when I was 18. That was 22 years ago. On my first day, my training officer told me something I never forgot. She said that one day, the galaxy would try to put us down, and when that day came, we would be ready. She put a hand on his shoulder. Every drill we ever ran, every simulation, every late night in the engine room, it was all for this. We are not afraid, Lieutenant. We have been waiting. He thought about his own training, the endless combat scenarios, the war games that always featured an enemy with overwhelming numbers, the classes on asymmetric warfare and surprise tactics. He had always thought it was just standard military education. Now he understood. It was rehearsal. 12,000 light-years away, Commander Dreth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Claw of Orith, and reviewed his battle plans. He had 10,000 ships, and more arriving every day. The humans had, according to his intelligence, 600. This was not a war. This was an errand. How long until we reach human space? He asked his navigator. 4 days, Commander. Dreth nodded. Inform the Council that the human problem will be resolved within 10 days. I want their fleet destroyed and their admiral in chains by the end of the cycle. His officers saluted and went about their duties. None of them noticed the small maintenance drone in the corner of the bridge, its single camera eye blinking once, twice, then transmitting everything it had seen to a receiver that should not have existed on a Council warship. On Orith, Emissary Pollock sat alone in his quarters and composed a message. He encrypted it 7 times, routed it through 4 dead systems, and sent it to Earth's embassy station. The message contained a single line. I am sorry I could not stop them. Please remember mercy. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He had read the old reports, the ones his own government had buried. He had seen what human soldiers did in their own history when they were pushed into a corner. He had studied their wars, their revolutions, their long and bloody climb from the mud to the stars. The Council thought they were declaring war on a minor species. The Council had just poked something ancient and patient and terrible, and by the time they realized their mistake, it would already be over. The Council's advance fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler corridor, right next to Way Station 12. 800 warships from 11 different species spread out in a wide formation, their sensors sweeping the dark space ahead. Behind the fleet, supply ships and troop carriers followed in neat rows. Everything was organized. Everything was professional. Everything was calm. And there was nothing there. The station was dark. Its docking arms were empty. Its running lights were off. No human ships, no human signals, nothing. Fleet Commander Wrath, a broad-shouldered officer from Dreth's own species, leaned forward in his chair and frowned at his tactical display. Full scanned, every frequency. I want to know where they are hiding, he ordered. His sensor officers worked their stations for several minutes. The results came back the same every time. Empty space, no ships, no mines, no orbital platforms. Nothing. Maybe they ran, one of his officers said. Wrath shook his head slowly. Humans do not run. That is the one thing every species agrees on. They do not run. He stared at the empty space and felt something cold settle in his chest. Something is wrong. He was right. At that exact moment, 12,000 light-years away, Murray sat in her intelligence center on Earth's forward command station and pressed a single key on her console. Every Council ship in the advance fleet lost encrypted communications at the same time. It was not a gradual failure. It was not a malfunction. One moment, 800 ships were connected by a secure tactical network that allowed them to coordinate movements, share targeting data, and respond as a single unit. The next moment, that network was gone. Officers across the fleet shouted in confusion. Captains called for their communication teams. Engineers ran diagnostics that showed nothing wrong with their hardware, because nothing was wrong with their hardware. The problem was in the software, buried so deep that no one would find it for weeks. Mireille's people had planted it there 4 years ago. The fleet could still talk on open, unencrypted channels, but their ability to fight as one coordinated force was gone. And then the stars changed. Jisok was standing at his station on the bridge of the Haite when the cloak dropped. One moment, the Haite was invisible. The next, it was there, hanging in space like a dark blade, and around it, 200 ships of the Gwanggaeto fleet appeared out of nothing. He had seen the ships in dock. He had walked their corridors. But seeing them here, in open space, in battle formation, was something else entirely. They were massive, and angular, and black, and they radiated an energy that made the sensor displays flicker and hum. They looked like nothing the galaxy had ever built. They looked like weapons designed by people who had spent 30 years thinking about one single question. What would it take to win against everyone? On the bridge, Yuna sat in her command chair and watched the council fleet on the main display. 800 red dots, scattered and confused. 200 blue dots, tight and ready. Open a channel, she said. All frequencies. Taeho nodded. Channel open. Yuna spoke clearly and without emotion. Attention, Council Fleet. You have entered the space of the United Earth Navy. You were not invited. I will give you 90 seconds to power down your weapons and transmit your surrender. After that, I will demonstrate why you should have left us alone. Silence. Then the open channel filled with voices. Council officers laughing. Someone called her bluff. Someone else pointed out that they outnumbered her 4-1. Yuna muted the channel. She looked at Taeho. Begin. The Haite fired first. Jisok had trained on the ship's weapon systems. He understood, in theory, what a kinetic lance did. It accelerated a dense metal projectile to a significant fraction of the speed of light, and fired it in a straight line. In theory, it was simple. In practice, it was the most terrifying weapon he had ever seen. The first shot from the Haite hit a council cruiser dead center. The ship did not explode the way ships did in simulations. It folded. The projectile punched through the front, passed through every deck, and exited the back, and the entire vessel crumpled inward like a paper cup crushed by a fist. The ship's shields, designed to absorb energy weapon fire, did nothing. They were not built for this. Then the rest of the Gwanggaeto fleet opened fire. It was a lesson. Council ships fired back with plasma cannons and guided missiles, the same weapons that had won every war in galactic history. The plasma bolts splashed against the human ships' hulls and did almost nothing. The missiles were picked off by point defense systems so fast and precise that they looked like swarms of fireflies blinking out one by one. Jisok stood at his station and watched the tactical display as red dots disappeared. 10, 20, 50, 100. The council ships tried to regroup, but without their tactical network, they could not coordinate. They flew into each other's firing lines. They clustered together for protection and made themselves bigger targets. They broke apart and ran in different directions and were picked off alone. The Haite moved through the battlefield like a predator through a herd. Yuna gave orders in a calm, quiet voice, never raising it, never rushing. She directed her ships the way a chess player moved pieces, always 3 steps ahead, always closing off escape routes before the enemy knew they were trapped. Target Group 7 is attempting to flank our left wing, Taeho reported. Let them, Yuna said. Battery stations 9 through 12 hold fire until they commit to the turn, then take their engines. 12 seconds later, 15 council ships turned to execute their flanking maneuver, and 12 kinetic lances fired simultaneously, coring their engine sections. The ships drifted, powerless and dark. Jisok's hands were shaking, not from fear. He did not know what he was feeling. It was something between awe and horror, something too big for a name. These were real ships crumbling on his screen, real beings inside them, and humanity was cutting through them like they were nothing. 22 minutes after the first shot, it was over. 619 council ships were destroyed. 181 had surrendered and were being boarded by human marines. 0 human ships were lost, not one. The Hayate had taken a single hit to its lower hull that left a scorch mark the size of a dining table. The bridge was silent. The crew stared at their screens, at the field of wreckage that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. Yuna stood from her chair. "Open a channel, all galactic frequencies." Teiho obeyed. Yuna looked into the camera. Her face was still calm, still unreadable. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger, no triumph, no pride, just cold, absolute certainty. "That was your warning. And next one will not be." She cut the channel and turned to Teiho. "Set course for the Charon Nebula. The main fleet will be there in 6 days. She paused. "And Teiho, have the medical teams treat the council survivors first, before our own wounded." "Admiral, they are not our enemies anymore. They are our prisoners, and they are hurt. Treat them first." Teiho nodded slowly. "Yes, Admiral." Yuna left the bridge without another word. Gisek stood at his station for a long time after she was gone. His hands had stopped shaking, but his mind had not stopped spinning. He had joined the Navy because he believed in Earth. He believed in protecting people. He had never imagined this. He looked at the wreckage on the screen and tried to feel something simple. Pride, horror, guilt. But all he could feel was the weight of a single truth settling into his bones. This was what Earth had been building toward, not just ships and weapons and spy networks. Earth had built an answer, a final, complete, undeniable answer to the question the galaxy had been asking for 60 years. The question was, what are the humans? And the answer, burning in the wreckage of 800 ships, was clear. We are what happens when you push something patient past its limit. 12,000 light-years away, Commander Dreth received the battle report in his quarters on the Claw of Orith. He read it 3 times. Then he sat down heavily in his chair and stared at the wall. On Orith, Emissary Palak stood beside Grand Arbiter Veloth in the Council's private viewing room. The battle footage played on the screen in complete silence. When it ended, Veloth said nothing. Palak looked at the old Arbiter's cracked stone face and said quietly, "I told you." Veloth did not respond, but for the first time in 300 years, his hands were shaking. Yuna did not give the Council time to think. Within 48 hours of the battle at Waystation 12, she launched 3 simultaneous offensives across Council space, striking at targets the galaxy believed were untouchable. The first strike was led by Teiho. He took a fast fleet of 80 ships and drove straight for the Council's primary shipyard at Neth 4, a massive orbital station that could build 30 warships at a time. It was the heart of the Council's war machine, and it was supposed to be protected by 200 defense platforms and a permanent garrison fleet. The defense platforms went offline 6 hours before Teiho arrived, every single one. Mireille's operatives had activated the surprise she had planted 6 years earlier, a series of tiny programs hidden deep inside the station's maintenance systems that, when triggered, simply told the platforms to go to sleep. By the time the garrison engineers realized what was happening, Teiho's fleet was already there. The battle for Neth 4 lasted less than an hour. The garrison fleet fought hard, but they were outnumbered in firepower if not in ships, and without their defense platforms, they had no chance. Teiho disabled the shipyard's construction arms with precise strikes, and left the station intact, but useless. He did not destroy it. Yuna had been very clear about that. Cripple their ability to build, she had told him. Do not give them a reason to hate us forever. The second strike was not a battle at all. Across an entire arm of the galaxy, Mireille's operatives carried out the largest, coordinated sabotage operation in history. In a single night, they disabled the Council's long-range sensor network across 37 systems. Relay stations went dark. Deep space listening posts lost power. Sensor satellites began transmitting garbage data. The Council was now blind in a third of their own territory. They could not see what was coming, and they could not see what was already there. The third strike was Yuna herself. She took the main Guangado fleet, 1,400 warships, and began a slow and deliberate advance toward the Council's capital system. She did not hurry. She did not need to. Every hour that passed, the Council's situation got worse. She was not just moving ships. She was moving fear. And fear worked. Within 3 days of the triple strike, the Council began to crack. Species that had voted for the war with enthusiasm were now screaming at each other in emergency sessions. The blame shifted like water. It was Veloth's fault for calling the vote. It was Dreth's fault for underestimating the humans. It was everyone's fault and no one's fault. 3 species withdrew from the war entirely. They issued a public statement calling the original vote a mistake and declaring neutrality. 2 others followed within hours. The perfect unity of 42 species was breaking apart like ice in warm water. But Commander Dreth was not broken, not yet. He gathered everything he had left, 6,000 warships from the most powerful species in the Council, and positioned them in the Charon Nebula. It was a massive cloud of gas and dust and charged particles, and Dreth chose it for one reason. The nebula's interference would disrupt sensors on both sides. Inside the nebula, Earth's technological advantage would shrink. It would be closer to a fair fight. It was the smartest decision Dreth had made in the entire war. Yuna respected him for it. "He is trying to level the ground," she said to Tejo as they reviewed the intelligence reports. "He knows he cannot win in open space, so he is pulling us into a place where our eyes are as blind as his." "Do we go around?" Tejo asked. Yuna shook her head. "No. If we go around, he will reposition and we will chase him for months. The war must end quickly. Slow wars become cruel wars." She studied the map of the nebula for a long time. "We go through him." The Battle of Charon Nebula was the first time humanity paid a real price. The Guangado fleet entered the nebula in a tight formation, sensors struggling against the interference. Dreth had positioned his ships well, hidden behind dense clouds of gas, using the nebula's natural energy discharges to mask their signatures. For the first time in the war, the Council struck first. A wave of missiles came out of the fog and hit the lead human ships before the point defense systems could react properly. 3 ships were destroyed instantly. 2 more were crippled. The fleet scattered into battle formations as Dreth's 6,000 ships emerged from every direction. Jisok was on the Haitei's gun deck when the first impacts shook the ship. The lights flickered. Alarms screamed. He grabbed the edge of his console and watched the tactical display fill with red dots. More red dots than he had ever seen, pouring out of the nebula like blood from a wound. For 20 terrible minutes, it was chaos. Human ships and Council ships twisted through the colored fog, firing at shadows and sensor ghosts. The kinetic lances were less effective at close range inside the nebula, and the Council's plasma weapons found their marks more often. Jisok saw a human destroyer named the Busan take a direct hit to its bridge section and go dark. He saw escape pods launching from the cruiser Sokcho as it broke apart. 40 human ships were destroyed. It was more than every previous battle of the war combined. On the bridge, Yuna watched the losses mount on her display. Tejo saw her jaw tighten. He saw her eyes narrow, but she did not panic. She did not shout. She sat very still for about 10 seconds, and then she gave an order that changed the battle. "Deploy the carriers, all of them, unmanned wings, full release. From the bellies of 30 large ships that had stayed at the back of the formation, thousands of small, unmanned fighters launched into the nebula. They were fast, cheap, and controlled by AI systems that did not care about fog or interference or fear. They did not need sensors to find the enemy. They hunted by heat and motion and sound. And in the thick clouds of the nebula, they were perfect. The drone swarms poured through the gas clouds like a flood. They found council ships hiding in pockets of dust. They swarmed around larger vessels and cut them apart piece by piece, targeting engines and weapons with surgical precision. Dreth's fleet, which had been winning for 20 minutes, was surrounded within an hour. The drones cut off every escape route. The Gwanggaeto fleet reformed into a ring around the council position, and Yuna closed the trap. Dreth knew it was over. His officers begged him to surrender. His flagship was damaged. His fleet was being taken apart from every angle. He refused. "I will not be the commander who surrendered to the humans," he said. He ordered his remaining ships to fight to the last, and he turned his own flagship toward the Hete for one final charge. Yuna watched the Claw of Orith coming toward her on the display, its engines burning white-hot, its weapons firing everything it had left. She said nothing for a long moment. "Admiral," Taeho said. "Orders?" "Let him come," Yuna said quietly. "Let him come close." The Claw of Orith fired its main cannon at the Hete. The shot struck the forward hull and shook the entire ship. Damage alarms went off across 3 decks. Jisok was thrown from his seat. Yuna did not flinch. She waited until Dreth's ship was within visual range, close enough that she could see its scarred and burning hull through the observation window. "Fire," she said. A single kinetic lance round hit the Claw of Orith through its reactor core. The ship split in two and came apart in a bloom of white light. Yuna watched the explosion fade. The bridge was silent. "He deserved a better war," she said softly. After the battle, Jisok walked through the corridors of the Hete and saw things he had not seen before. Medics carrying wounded, engineers welding patches over hull breaches. A group of soldiers sitting in a corridor, not talking, just sitting together, because they had lost friends on the Busan and the Sokcho and a dozen other ships. The war was not free. The war had a cost, and Jisok, who had been promoted in the field when his gun deck commander was injured during the battle, felt that cost in his chest like a stone. Later that night, Taeho found Yuna alone in the war room, staring at the holographic map. The path to Orith was open. 1,400 human ships, minus their losses, against the Council's last 2,000 defenders. "Chancellor Soha called," Taeho said. "She asked how far we go." Yuna did not look away from the map. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I would ask you." Yuna was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was low and certain and tired. "Far enough that no one ever votes on our existence again." The stars of the Council's capital system grew bright on the horizon. The final battle over Orith was not what the galaxy expected. The Council's last 2,000 ships formed a defensive sphere around their capital world, ready to fight to the end. Their crews were afraid, but they were not cowards. They had seen the footage from Waystation 12 and the Charon Nebula, and they knew what was coming, and they chose to stand anyway. Yuna respected that. She told Taeho so as the Gwanggaeto fleet took position at the edge of the system. "They know they will lose," she said, "and they are still here. That takes something." She opened a channel to the Council fleet. "This is Admiral Yuna of the United Earth Navy. I am offering terms of surrender. Power down your weapons, hold your positions, and no more of your people will die today. You have 30 minutes to respond." The Council fleet did not respond. Instead, they tightened their formation and charged their weapons. Yuna waited the full 30 minutes. Then she ordered the fleet forward. The battle began at long range, with the Gwanggaeto fleet firing kinetic lances from outside the effective range of Council plasma cannons. The Council ships held their sphere, absorbing losses, waiting for the humans to come closer. It was a brave strategy. If they could draw the human fleet into close combat around the planet, the risk of hitting Orith itself might force Yuna to hold her fire. It did not work. Yuna had no intention of fighting near the planet. She split her fleet into 4 groups and hit the defensive sphere from 4 directions at once, peeling it apart, layer by layer, like the skin of a fruit. Each group would strike, pull back, and strike again from a different angle. The Council ships could not turn fast enough to face all 4 threats. Midway through the battle, Yuna opened the channel again. Second offer of surrender. Same terms. You have 10 minutes. The Council admirals were still hoping for a miracle. No miracle came. After 2 hours, 70% of the Council fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships were scattered, broken into small groups with no coordination and no hope of victory. Their communications were full of panicked voices in a dozen different languages, all saying the same thing. It is over. We cannot win. Someone tell the Arbiter. Grand Arbiter Veloth stood in the Council's command center, deep beneath the surface of Orith, and watched the battle on a wall of screens. Around him, aides and officers rushed back and forth, shouting, arguing, some of them crying. Veloth stood still in the center of it all, his 6 limbs hanging at his sides, his ancient face unreadable. Emissary Palok stood beside him. He had not left Veloth's side since the battle began. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Veloth watched another cluster of Council ships go dark on the display. Then he closed his eyes. "Order the fleet to surrender," he said. An admiral standing nearby grabbed his arm. "Arbiter, we can still fight. If we hold the orbital platforms and the ground defenses, we can make them bleed for every step." Veloth opened his eyes and looked at the admiral with an expression so old and tired that the younger officer released his arm and stepped back. "They have bled enough," Veloth said. "We started this. Every death today is on our hands. Order the surrender. Now." The Council fleet powered down its weapons. White lights blinked across the remaining ships, the universal signal of surrender. The Gwanggaeto fleet held its fire and moved into holding positions. The war was over. It had lasted 11 days. 6 hours later, Yuna walked into the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council. She wore her standard uniform. No medals, no decorations, no ceremonial sword or flag or symbol of conquest. Just the same dark uniform she had worn on the bridge of the Haete since the first day. Behind her walked Taeho, Jisiok, and a single platoon of Marines. The Marines carried their weapons but kept them lowered. The chamber was nearly empty. Most of the 42 seats were vacant. The species that had withdrawn from the war had sent no representatives. The species that had lost their fleets had no one left to send. Only 11 delegations remained, sitting in their seats with the hollow look of people who had just learned what they really were. Veloth stood at the center of the chamber. He looked smaller than Jisiok had imagined. On the broadcast, he had seemed enormous, ancient, powerful. In person, he was just an old being who had made a terrible mistake and was now standing in the ruins of it. "What are your terms, Admiral?" Veloth asked. His voice echoed in the empty chamber. Yuna stopped in the center of the floor. She looked around the room slowly, at the empty seats, at the high ceiling, at the small, low chair at the very back where Earth's ambassador had been silenced only weeks ago. Then she looked at Veloth and spoke. "No territory will be claimed. Earth does not want your worlds. Silence. No reparations will be demanded. Earth does not want your wealth." The remaining council members stared at her. This was not what they had expected. This was not what any conquering species had ever done in the history of the galaxy. The council in its current form is dissolved. A new council will be formed with equal representation for every species, including the minor species this body has spent centuries ignoring. No more highest seats and lowest seats. Every voice will carry the same weight. Veloth's eyes widened. Every species that voted for this war will issue a public statement acknowledging that it was unjust and unprovoked. As truth. Yuna paused. Her voice softened, but did not weaken. Humanity will share its technological advances with all species, freely. Medical technology, energy systems, agricultural methods. Everything we built in the dark, we will give to you in the light. Not because you deserve it, because the galaxy deserves better than what this council has built. She let that settle. Then she pointed to the back of the chamber, at the small low chair where Dohan had sat. One final condition, that chair stays. It will be moved to the center of the new chamber, and it will never be removed. It will sit there forever, as a reminder of what this council did, and what happens when you decide that a species does not matter. Veloth was silent for a very long time. The chamber was so quiet that Giseok could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, the Grand Arbiter bowed his head. Agreed, he said. All terms accepted. The formal surrender was signed within the hour. Afterward, as the delegations filed out of the chamber, Palak approached Yuna. He stood in front of her and studied her face with his large, dark eyes. You could have taken everything, he said. You had the fleet. You had the power. You could have burned Orith and claimed the Council's territory, and made humanity the rulers of this galaxy. Why did you not? Yuna looked at him. For the first time since Giseok had met her, her expression changed. The cold mask softened. Not much, just enough to show something human underneath. Because we did not fight to become you, she said. We fought so no one would ever have to. Palak stared at her. Then he bowed, lower than Giseok had ever seen any alien bow to a human. Then perhaps, he said quietly, the galaxy is in better hands than it knows. He turned and walked away. That evening, after the documents were signed and the fleet was standing down and the galaxy was trying to understand what had just happened, Giseok walked through the grand chamber alone. The seats were empty. The screens were dark. The only light came from the tall windows that looked out over the mountains of Orith. He walked to the center of the chamber and stood in front of the small chair. It was plain and worn and uncomfortable looking. It was the chair where humanity had sat for 60 years, ignored and mocked and told to be quiet. He reached out and touched its back. The material was cold. He thought about Dohan, pressing the speaking button again and again, while no one listened. He thought about Bora, the sergeant, who had spent 22 years preparing for a war she hoped would come. He thought about the crews of the Busan and the Sokcho, who would never see this chamber or this moment. He thought about Yuna, pressing her 2 words into the ears of every human alive. At last, not a cry of revenge, not a promise of destruction, just the exhausted, patient, unbreakable relief of someone who had finally been given the chance to prove what she had always known, that they were enough, that they had always been enough. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Yuna walking through the chamber toward the exit. She paused when she saw him standing by the chair. "Lieutenant," she said. "Admiral." He straightened. I know." She looked at the chair. Something moved across her face, quick and private, and then it was gone. Do not forget what it felt like to sit there. The new council will need people who remember. She walked on. Later on the observation deck of the Haitai, Yuna stood alone and looked out at the stars. The fleet was in orbit around Orith, and the planet turned slowly below, green and gray and blue in the light of its sun. It looked peaceful. It looked like a place where things could begin again. Teho joined her. He stood beside her and said nothing for a while. They had known each other for 20 years. They did not always need words. "It is over," he said finally. Yuna shook her head slowly. "No, now the hard part begins. Now we have to build something worth all of this." She paused. The starlight caught her face, and Jisok, who was standing at the far end of the deck and thought she could not see him, saw something he had never seen from Admiral Yuna. She smiled. Not the cold smile from the bridge. Not the sharp smile of a woman who had been waiting for war. This was something smaller and warmer and more real. The smile of someone who was very, very tired and very, very relieved. "But at last," she said softly, almost to herself, "we get the chance." The stars burned on. The fleet held its position. And somewhere in the grand chamber below, a small chair sat in the silence, waiting to be moved to the center of a new world.